The Vega Station was not a place for the faint-hearted. For Thrax, a timid scholar from the peaceful Ebral species, it was like stepping into a den of predators. The sprawling station was a chaotic convergence of smuggled goods, shady deals, and criminals seeking refuge from the long arm of intergalactic law. The air itself seemed heavy with tension and the scent of ozone from poorly maintained energy weapons. Here, respect was earned through force, not intellect. A notion that was entirely alien to someone like Thrax, whose life had been spent among scrolls, starlight observatories, and academic symposiums. Thrax had no desire to be in a place like this, but he was desperate. He needed to secure a rare component, a delicate power core vital for his research. It was an elusive piece of technology, available only in lawless corners like Vega Station, where merchants cared more for credits than the ethical use of their wares. For Thrax, whose scientific work focused on sustainable energy sources for his homeworld, the journey had been unavoidable. Yet the moment he disembarked from his modest vessel onto the grimy, bustling docks of the station, he realized just how unprepared he was. The station was a labyrinth of neon signs and shadowed alleys, filled with a cacophony of alien languages and the occasional hiss of plasma discharges. The walls were plastered with flickering advertisements for illegal substances and offers of questionable services. Mercenaries with scarred faces, hulking brutes of various species, and robed figures who hid their intentions beneath layers of fabric and secrecy filled every corner, their eyes following anyone who looked vulnerable. Thrax's small, fragile frame and wide, innocent eyes made him stand out like a lamb among wolves. He clutched his satchel tightly to his chest, where he kept his research notes and credits hidden, his heart pounding as he navigated the crowded corridors. Thrax was used to the quiet hum of research stations, the gentle rustle of data pads, and the comforting routine of his peaceful homeworld. Here he was a fish out of water, floundering in a sea of aggression and lawlessness. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, to retreat to the safety of his vessel and return to his serene research center, where the biggest threat was a failed experiment. But he had come too far to abandon his quest now. Without that power core, months of research would be wasted. His people were counting on him to find a solution to the energy shortages threatening their world, and Thrax, despite his timid nature, couldn't bear the thought of letting them down. After days of navigating the treacherous depths of Vega Station, dodging scammers, swindlers, and worse, Thrax was at his wits' end. His journey had been far from smooth, filled with false leads and questionable merchants who seemed all too eager to take advantage of his naive, scholarly demeanor. The peaceful Ebral species were ill-suited to places like this. Thrax was like a wandering lamb amidst a pack of wolves, constantly on edge and wary of every shadow. Exhausted and disheartened, he finally found himself at the Rusty Comet, a bar infamous for its rowdy patrons, but known to be a place where deals were made, sometimes even the honest kind. The dimly lit bar reeked of spilled ale and unwashed bodies, but it was a far cry from the confrontational chaos of the marketplace outside. Keeping his head down, Thrax slipped through the crowd, his small frame dodging elbows and tentacles alike. He approached the bar, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might mistake him for easy prey. Hey, just a mild beverage, please," Thrax stammered to the bartender, a burly alien who grunted in response before slamming a murky glass in front of him. Thrax wrapped his long fingers around the drink, trying to relax. The bitter liquid stung his throat, but it was a welcome distraction from the anxiety gnawing at him. He had barely taken a few sips when a shadow loomed over him. "Looking for something special, friend?" A scruffy, shifty-eyed alien had sidled up next to him. The stranger's grin was crooked, revealing a row of jagged teeth. "I heard you've been searching for a power core, yes? I just so happen to have exactly what you need." Thrax's eyes widened. Finally, after days of fruitless searching, was this it? Could his ordeal be over? You really have one?" he asked, hope tinged with desperation. The alien leaned in closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Oh, yes. Top quality, very rare. But of course, something like that doesn't come cheap." Thrax was about to agree when another voice interrupted. "Let me guess, you're about to pay double the price for a core that won't even power a flashlight." Thrax turned to see a human sitting at the bar nearby, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. The human had short brown hair, a weathered leather jacket, and an air of quiet confidence. Without looking directly at Thrax, he continued, "That guy's been hanging around here all week, preying on anyone desperate enough to listen." The shady alien's grin vanished, and he quickly made himself scarce, muttering curses under his breath. Thrax watched him go, his heart sinking. Another dead end. But before despair could fully take hold, he turned to the human who had intervened. Thank you, Thrax stammered, still shaken. I almost... The human finally looked directly at him and gave a friendly smile. No need to thank me. I've seen that kind of scam more times than I can count. You've got to be careful around here. Thrax let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The bar's raucous noise seemed to fade slightly as relief washed over him. I appreciate your help, Thrax said, still shaken. I've never been good with this sort of place. The human signaled to the bartender for another drink and slid one over to Thrax. Then why on Vega Station of all places? He asked, genuinely curious. Thrax hesitated, but the human's casual demeanor put him at ease. I'm a researcher. I need a rare power core for a project. And, this was the only place I was told I might find it. He sipped his drink, grimacing at his harshness. But it's been nothing but scams and dead ends. The human chuckled, shaking his head. Yeah, this place isn't exactly known for honest business. He leaned back in his chair, looking every bit at ease in this seedy environment. I've been coming here on and off for years. Seen all kinds, con men, bounty hunters, pirates, and a few folks like you who are just in the wrong place. Thrax, intrigued despite himself, asked, And what about you? What brings you here? The human took a long swig of his drink before answering, a sly grin forming on his lips. Me? I've been in all sorts of scrapes. Rescued a princess, fought off a band of mercenaries on Triton, saved planet Galner from an invasion. Once even helped a rebellion overthrow its oppressors. Thrax couldn't help but let out a skeptical laugh. You must have had quite the adventures, he said, the sarcasm thinly veiled. To him, the stories were so outlandish, they had to be fabrications. Clearly, the human had had a bit too much to drink. The human leaned in closer, as if sharing a secret. Believe it or not, most of them are true, though I suppose they sound a bit far-fetched after a few rounds. He winked, and Thrax couldn't help but laugh. For the first time since arriving on Vega Station, he felt a glimmer of genuine camaraderie. The conversation flowed easily after that. The human regaled Thrax with tales of daring escapes, impossible heists, and near-death experiences in distant star systems. Thrax, despite himself, found the stories wildly entertaining. He kept telling himself that the human was probably just spinning tall tales, drunk on whatever strong brew the bar was serving, but he couldn't deny that he was enjoying the company. Finally, after what felt like hours, the human stood up, a bit unsteadily. Well, friend, it's been a pleasure, but I've got places to be, he said, slapping a few credits on the counter for the drinks. Thrax, still chuckling at the last outrageous story, said, Thank you for the company and the help earlier. The human paused before turning away. He leaned in one last time and said, Tell you what, there's a shop in the lower sector called Hex's Emporium. It's hidden, not easy to find, but the guy there deals in genuine parts. If you mention that you're a friend of mine, he'll treat you right. For a moment, Thrax considered ignoring the human's advice, fearing it was just another wild goose chase. But something about the man's demeanor made him trust it, if only a little. With no other leads left, he decided to give it a shot. The next day, following the human's directions, Thrax ventured deep into the labyrinthine lower sector of Vega Station. To his amazement, he found Hex's Emporium tucked away in a hidden corner. And to his further surprise, the shopkeeper treated him with unexpected respect after Thrax mentioned that he was a friend of the mysterious human. The power core was genuine, and the price, though steep, was fair. Thrax was grateful to the human, though a bit curious as to why merely mentioning his name earned him such respect from the shopkeeper. Yet in the end, he chose not to dwell on it, chalking it up to the eccentricities of a place like Vega Station. After all, he had finally secured the power core he needed, and that was all that mattered to him at the moment. Thrax thought the worst was behind him. He had managed to secure the rare power core he needed for his research and was ready to leave the chaotic Vega Station behind. But fate had other plans. As he exited the obscurely lit marketplace, relief flooding through him at the thought of returning to his quiet research station, a hand suddenly clamped over his mouth. He tried to scream, but the sound was muffled. Cold, steel-like arms gripped him from behind, dragging him into a narrow alleyway filled with shadows. Thrax's eyes widened in terror, his heart racing as he struggled futilely against his captors. The next thing he knew, a rough, stained hood was pulled over his head, plunging him into darkness. He could hear gruff voices around him, speaking in hushed, conspiratorial tones. They were arguing in a language he didn't recognize, and all Thrax could do was listen in panicked silence as they hustled him through the labyrinthine back alleys of the station. Every bump and jolt made his anxiety skyrocket. He had no idea where they were taking him or why. After what felt like an eternity, they reached their destination. Thrax was roughly pushed into a chair, the hood yanked off to reveal a shadowy chamber filled with intimidating figures. Thrax blinked rapidly, his sensitive eyes adjusting to the dim light. The walls were streaked with grime, and the only illumination came from flickering overhead lamps that cast eerie shadows. Before him stood a towering figure with scales the color of tarnished copper and one cybernetic eye that glowed a sinister red. The alien's mechanical limbs clicked and whirred ominously as he paced back and forth, studying Thrax with a predatory gaze. This was Graxar, a notorious crime lord known for his brutal efficiency and ruthless methods. Thrax tried to speak, to explain that he was just a researcher, but his words were cut off by a harsh backhanded slap from one of Graxar's henchmen. The blow sent him sprawling to the floor, his vision swimming. "Get him up!" Graxar barked, his voice like the grinding of gears. Thrax was yanked upright, his legs barely supporting him. Graxar leaned in close, his breath rancid. "We've been keeping an eye on you, little Abralian," he growled. "We know you've been snooping around, and we don't like it when strangers stick their noses where they don't belong. Who are you spying for?" I'm not a spy," Thrax stammered, his voice shaking. "I swear, I'm just a researcher, a scientist. I needed a power core for—" "Enough with the lies," a henchman with jagged fangs snarled. "We saw you meeting with someone in the Rusty Comet. Who was that human? What were you discussing? What did he want from us?" He added with a sneer, "I know humans are trouble." Thrax's heart sank. The memory of the brief but pleasant encounter with the human surfaced, now turning into a curse. "Damned human," Thrax thought bitterly. "If only I'd kept to myself at that bar, I wouldn't be in this mess. I'm going to die because of that human." He hadn't thought much of it at the time, just a casual conversation over drinks. But now, under the intense scrutiny of Graxar's gang, that simple meeting seemed to have taken on a far more sinister implication. I don't know him," Thrax pleaded, his voice breaking. "He was just a random stranger. We shared a drink, that's all. He said his name was Jack Mason." The moment the name left his lips, the room went deathly silent. Thrax could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights, the slow drip of water from a broken pipe, and the rapid beating of his own heart. The mercenaries exchanged looks of disbelief and horror. "Jack Mason?" one of them echoed, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Graxar's cybernetic eye flickered, and his metal hand twitched involuntarily. For a moment it looked as though he had seen a ghost. Another thug, younger and less battle-scarred than the rest, backed away slowly, his face draining of color. "No way, not him. I have heard so many stories about him," he muttered, shaking his head. "I didn't sign up for this. If Mason's mixed up in this, I'm done." Without another word, he dropped his weapon and sprinted out of the room. The tension in the room was palpable. Thrax, still bound to the chair, was utterly confused. What kind of person was Jack Mason to inspire such dread in these hardened criminals? Graxar seemed to struggle internally, his mechanical eye flickering erratically. Finally, he let out a frustrated growl. "Damn it!" he spat, waving a dismissive hand. "Get him out of here. I'm not risking my neck over some blue-skinned scientist, especially if that blasted Mason is involved." Before Thrax could fully grasp what was happening, the thugs untied him. As Thrax stood there, still in shock, the thugs hastily shoved him toward the door, almost tripping over themselves in their haste to be rid of him. "Go, go!" one of them urged, looking nervously at the door, as if expecting Mason to show up at any moment. He stumbled into the corridor, blinking in confusion, unsure if this was some cruel trick. But they didn't pursue him. Instead, they retreated like animals avoiding a fire. Thrax didn't waste any time. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him, not stopping until he reached the relative safety of his ship. As he collapsed into the pilot's seat, panting and shaking, the question pounded in his mind. Who was Jack Mason? And why did just mentioning his name strike terror into the hearts of ruthless criminals? Once he was safely back in his ship's quarters, Thrax's fear turned to curiosity. How had a simple name saved his life? Who was this Jack Mason, really? Determined to uncover the truth, Thrax ventured out into the bustling space station once again. Thrax began to ask questions around the station, but most beings refused to speak about Mason. Those who did only whispered fragments of stories, eyes darting around to make sure no one else could hear. Thrax was met with dead ends at every corner, until he found a small group of weary traders huddled together in a dimly lit corner of a cantina. They seemed the sort who had seen their fair share of danger, their eyes shadowed with secrets. One of them, an aging Ilian with a scar running down the side of his face, finally broke the silence when Thrax mentioned the name again. "Jack Mason, you say?" the trader whispered hoarsely, glancing over his shoulder. His voice dropped to barely a murmur, as though afraid the walls themselves might listen. "That name's not one you want to be asking about, kid. He's a ghost." Thrax leaned in, eager for more. The trader hesitated, but the lure of a good story eventually overcame his fear. "What you don't understand, friend," the Ilian continued, "is that Mason is no ordinary man. He's a force of nature, a living nightmare to those who've earned his ire. No one knows where he came from. Some say Earth, but that's just another one of those legends. What's known for sure is that wherever he goes, destruction follows." Another trader, a younger rodent, chimed in, his voice trembling. "He single-handedly dismantled the Black Sun Syndicate, crushed it into nothing, left their leaders in pieces. It was like he enjoyed it." Thrax's mind reeled. A single man against an entire syndicate? The scale of the claim was hard to believe, but the fear in their eyes spoke volumes. He pushed them for more, and reluctantly the traders shared what they knew. "There's more," the Ilian said, wiping his brow nervously. "Mason once rescued the Princess of the Zarya. Kidnapped by the Xyrix Syndicate, an entire fleet went after her. They failed. He walked straight into their stronghold, took her, and left with barely a scratch." The rodent swallowed hard. "And that's not all. There's a story about him overthrowing a tyrant on the planet Vorla. The whole civilization was enslaved, mind you, living under a brutal dictator. Mason led a revolt, him and a ragtag group of misfits against an entire army. By the end of it, the tyrant was dead, and Mason was gone. Just like that. He never took credit for it. He just disappeared." The alien leaned forward, his voice now barely a whisper. "He also saved planet Galnor from an invasion. The Galnorians were facing a full-scale attack by a race of insectoid creatures, savages who'd been terrorizing the sector. Everyone thought Galnor was finished, except Mason. He infiltrated their mothership, planted charges, and disabled their entire fleet. Took out their queen, never even flinched. He saved the whole damn planet." Thrax's pulse raced as he listened, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Jack Mason wasn't just some adventurer. He was a living legend, a man who had single-handedly toppled empires, rescued royalty, and thwarted invasions. Every story he heard painted Mason as someone who didn't just fight for the right cause. He embodied the very concept of justice, even if he didn't see it that way. What Thrax learned was more incredible than anything Jack had shared over drinks. Thrax realized just how lucky he had been. The human he had met was no ordinary creature. He was a myth, a name spoken with a mix of fear and reverence across the galaxy. Jack Mason was feared and respected in equal measure. The mere mention of his name could make the most hardened criminals run for their lives. And Thrax had learned that the hard way why Graxar, a ruthless crime lord, had been too afraid to cross him. For the first time in his life, Thrax felt the weight of what he had narrowly avoided. He hadn't been saved by any kind of mercy or negotiation. He had been saved by the sheer weight of Jack Mason's reputation.